Good evening, my friends, and Happy New Year. It's New Year's Eve. Can you believe that? We're about to switch over to 2022. May it be better than the last couple of years because it's been rough, but we're here tonight and we've got something to talk about. So, as a lot of you probably know, back in the late 40s after Roswell, a lot of time back then, a lot of things was going on. There was a fleet of UFOs seen over Washington, D.C., sightings everywhere. And in response to the public demand, the Air Force created Project Bluebook, which now we know is a whitewash. But at the time, they took it seriously. They had a man named J. Allen Hynek. Dr. Hynek was an incredible investigator. But because of his Air Force affiliation, some things didn't come out like he wanted them to. And after Bluebook, he started investigating UFO on his own and became extremely famous. He was just so sharp, and he really brought this whole thing out of the nut house to the mainstream. And he taught a guy named Ted Phillips. Ted Phillips was just the most awesome investigator and just an incredible guy. The things he had seen and done would shock most people. After Ted, he trained a guy named Tom Ferrario. And that is our guest tonight. Tom lives over in Missouri now, but he was part of an investigation, many investigations. He was a dive team for looking for submerged UFOs. He's done incredible amount of stuff. But also, he was part of the famous Marley Woods investigation. The Marley Woods is located somewhere in Missouri, and we don't know where, don't need to. I know some folks from Skinwalker Ranch, and we all know that. Skinwalker Ranch has the exact same type of phenomenon as Marley Woods. But some of the people from Skinwalker Ranch come down and said, this place is even crazier. Tom has told me of stories that would curl your toes. The stuff going on there is incredible. And I'm going to bring him in because he once told me about, and I know this is not technically a show about UFOs, but because of the UFO activity, there's activity in a cemetery, poltergeist activity in homes, and cryptids. There's animals there nobody has ever seen, cannot identify. And when you shoot it with a high-powered rifle, it looks at you like you're an idiot and walks away. The things going on in the Marley Woods is incredible. So let's bring in the investigator, Tom Ferrario.
Well, hello, Dan.
Hey,
it's
Tom.
Good to talk to you again. And the last time we were,
buddy.
The last time doing great. I'm glad to be anywhere right now. I'll tell you. I will say, I just want to bring up the last time we were physically together was we were with Ted Phillips at a conference. I know you probably remember that.
Oh, very well. It was an honor to be there. And I knew you even before that. I was stunned when you came in Eureka Springs, Arkansas.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, of course, I met you through your daughter because we both worked at a winery. I was doing security there at the time.
Yes.
But yeah, she used to talk about you. So proud of the UFO work you were doing. So, and that's great because my daughters are like, yeah, he does ghosts, but other than that, he's a nice guy. So, but anyway, you talked that day in Eureka Springs, and that had to be what, 12, 14 years ago?
Yeah, going on 14 years ago. I can't believe it.
And you talked then, you and Ted, about Marley Woods.
Yes.
And the things you said even then, I could recognize as similar to the Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes.
Have you figured out if there's some kind of ley line or something to bring these two in common?
You know, we really haven't. And what sets Marley Woods and places like Skinwalker apart from any other ranch is what drove Ted Phillips. And I will tell you, some of the people at Skinwalker to this day, there's theories, but it drove Ted crazy. And that's one of the reasons why the man devoted practically the rest of his life to Marley Woods and focused on that. He could come up with no really physical reason or any good reason why. But it does go back decades in Marley Woods. And we tried to go back in the Native American. There is no, of course, there's no access to that now. There's no presence there of Native Americans. And so even Ted went with the University of Missouri And we just recently found out there was a Native American encampment at Marley Woods at a spring that we didn't know of before, but it goes back as far as recorded history as it does in Skinwalker. So
it's just incredible the amount of things going on there. But specifically, you talked about some paranormal activity around a cemetery and I think in other places.
Yeah.
What kind of activity do you know of?
Some of the activity we dealt with, and I will tell you, we were so fortunate through Ted and Ted's early years working with Alan Hynek and the Bluebook era. As Ted was in the nuts and bolts man out in the field doing the physical trace cases for Alan, a very great gentleman you know of, Jacques Vallée, was doing the software and the paperwork for Alan. And they worked as a team. And Ted got in the initial ages, I will tell you that if it varied from the nuts and bolts, he loved the structured craft cases. He'd go out and measure with a soil compactor the physical weight, which could approach 7 to 13 tons of a 30-foot disc. That's where he wanted to be. And he had a little bit outing with Alan in the beginning because Alan had stated, in working with Jock, it's so much more than this. That's too simplistic a view. And they started going down that this was all dimensionally based, which is frequency driven in their terminology. And that's where Ted ended up his opinion. And Ted always went with the science, no matter wherever the data led, that's where Ted would go. So we did get in the realm, and it ended up being more paranormal than anything in the end. So, and I just at this point have to interject one of Jacques Vallée's, when we worked with Jacques, he spent time with us at the ranch, and of course, Combe Keller, Bigelow's people, and they come away with the belief this was so much more than Jacques thought the potential for high strangeness was greater at Marley than at Skinwalker. And believe me,
that's
Jacques
something.
spent a lot of time at Skinwalker.
Okay, now I've got a lot of folks on mine that are not so much UFO people, but ghost people. So
yes.
I just want to specify that Ted was a UFO man with spaceships and figuring out, like you said, weight distribution and all of that.
Yes.
And for him to have to turn around and deal with spirits, the incorporeal type ghosts, for lack of a better word, that caused him some confusion, or at very least it bothered him.
Yes.
So the idea that all of this is connected, how do you feel about UFOs, cryptids, Bigfoot, ghosts are all somehow connected?
Well, I will tell you, I was just like Ted in the beginning. When I started out, I got hooked up with MUFON, and Bruce Whitteman, which was the state director, put me in training with a gentleman named Jim Cross, which was an Air Force captain and a pilot. And I worked with him for several years to go out and investigate cases. I had a big problem when somebody would bring up the paranormal experiences, a Bigfoot sighting. I had an issue with that. But working with Ted and Marley and the intelligence that we dealt with on a daily basis, the paranormal activity we dealt with on a daily basis, you have to go, as Ted did, where the data leads you and what you're dealing with. And I would just like to interject, one of my mentors was Jacques Vallée that spent time, and his statement so explains so much of this. And believe me, this gets a lot of ufologists mad. They don't like this statement. But Jacques said that we have evidence that the phenomenon has the ability to create a distortion of the sense of reality or to substitute artificial sensations for the real ones. Now, what that means is the phenomenon, what we're dealing with, the paranormal, and I'd like to warn people that get out and do paranormal work, investigations, don't believe everything you experience and see, because as Jock said, and we proved it at Marley, this has the ability to give you artificial sensations that a lot of times you're experiencing what they wished you to see and hear. So when you get in with an intelligence like that, you're really up against it, quite frankly.
Okay. Uh, the things you're saying, I guess I'm not grasping. Are you thinking some of this is demonic, or are you thinking this is extraterrestrial or extra dimensional?
You know, and far better people and above my pay grade than myself. As I stated, I did not want to go down that road, but
Yes.
a lot of what comes through is not good. And as I was instructed or explained this by, like I said, some of the best in the field, a lot of what comes through is not good and does not have the authority to be on this side. And I would advise anybody dealing in the paranormal investigations and everything to always keep that in the back of your mind, that everything you're experiencing is not there for your benefit. And we, quite frankly, at Marley, at times we were there. Ted called it his living laboratory. When we were out examining these things and thought we were monitoring this, we felt at times this was experimenting and monitoring us.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to always keep that in the back of your mind.
Just the time I start thinking I understand some of what's going on, someone like you comes along and pops the bubble. But anyway, let's get down to some specific cases of the paranormal around Marley Woods. What have you been told?
It dealt with everything from poltergeist type activity we experienced sometimes on a daily basis.
Okay.
And this could be as simple as things, you're out in the field when we're working, trying to capture things on video with security cameras and handheld camera. Mm-hmm. You go out, you put a battery pack down, you go back to change a battery pack, it's gone. Later on, you find a battery pack in the building, the structure that they built for us in Marley, in the most, craziest places. You go for your car keys, you're going to move a vehicle and your car keys are misplaced. And believe me, with Ted, you didn't misplacing things was something that you found out about very fast.
Yeah, he was a scientist. Everything had to be right. And I understand that. Yeah. So you were having poltergeist activity even at the lab where you were working out of?
Yes, very much so. And Ted actually warned me in the beginning. He said, Tom, there's a phenomenon out there I've experienced several times in people, the property owners. And he explained it to me, and I took it with a grain of salt. I thought, well, that's strange. But, one particular morning, I remember I was awoken, something physically shook me in the bed I was in the upstairs office. And Ted was in another part of the office up there where he slept in another bed. And this presence, something shook me physically. I woke up and I had just an overwhelming sense of euphoria, just joy. I felt like I was going to go out and the mothership was going to be out on our deck out there. And I get out there and the euphoria changed to just almost depression. Mm-hmm. Well, I went in, I ran in, and I told Ted what had happened. I woke him up, which is something you really didn't want to wake Ted up because we had limited sleeping hours. And Ted rolled over and looked at me and he said, well, Tom, welcome to Marley Woods. So that was one of my first experiences out there. And I will tell you that we worked with people from Skinwalker and one of the times we had an individual named Douglas Trumbull. Now, you may know that
I've
name.
heard of that, yes.
He did the special effects in Close Encounters and 2001 Space Odyssey. Wow. Now, he was a very good friend of Jacques Vallée. They had worked together on Close Encounters. Mm-hmm. And he was actually, at the time, he was making some camera equipment that was really high-tech stuff. And he brought a piece of equipment out to Marley Woods. And the property owner had an old log cabin with a window that pointed towards the North Mystery Light, which is a phenomenon out there we had. And Douglas set this camera on this camera weighed about 75 pounds.
Right.
He locked it on a heavy tripod. We left the cabin that night. The property owner had the only key, locked this piece of equipment in the room. The next morning, we went down to view what this camera had taken. As we enter the cabin, Douglas runs in to run up to his camera, and he turns around and looks at us with anger, and he says, "Who the hell has been messing with me?"
Right.
And we went in the cabin at that point, and the camera that had been locked down facing the North Mystery Light had been turned 90 degrees away from the window on a locked heavy tripod. Now, and Jock looked at the situation. He said, "Well, Douglas, I don't think anyone has been messing with you here. None of us did this." So Douglas finally accepted the fact that something got in this locked room, turned this heavy camera on a locked heavy duty tripod 90 degrees away from the window. Now, what does that?
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah.
So that is the kind of thing that happens to investigators, ghost investigators, but of course, nothing so heavy.
Yes.
So I got to get back now, because a lot of the people who watch my stuff and read my stuff knows about the spook light down in Hornet in Missouri. And there's a spook light here in North Carolina, a couple of them.
Yes.
You've got a spook light in Marley Woods also?
Yes. We have a wide variety of light ball activity. And I will say at this point that the white ones seem to be the more benign. The red ones seem the one that exhibit vast amounts of energy, and they're the bad guys. We have another weird, really strange thing that happens out there, phenomenon called the unseen force.
Okay.
And usually the unseen force comes after the red light balls are seen or experienced. And what that is, and I will say at this point that Ted had experienced red light balls. He filled in for Alan Hynek on cases when Alan had prior engagements or was sick overseas, and he had a wide experience with light balls. And that's one of the things why Ted found Marley Woods so interesting. When he read the reports about the red light balls, the white, red, yellow, ambers, we call them, Ted just felt like this was going to go bad at Marley, possibly. And so that's why he was so interested. But the unseen force was a force that could push down steel gates, log chain together, poke the hinge pins out of oak posts, not make a scratch on the gates, push individuals, people down, slam them down on the ground flat with in a bright, clear, no weather day, come out of nowhere and injure people. Had unimaginable amount of energy or force to it. But they were usually associated with red light balls in conjunction with. So we did have that log down too.
That is just stunning.
Yes.
That kind of power.
Yes.
Because if we deal with something like that in my field, we automatically assume demonic, because regular ghosts just really don't do that.
No, they don't.
But your field, the idea of demons and angels is kind of different, kind of not there.
Right.
So what do you attribute this to? Even a clue?
The one thing we dealt with that Ted formed the opinion, and Jock and everybody that spent time, we're dealing with an intelligence out there. And this intelligence, again, has the ability to, quite frankly, to work your perception. At times, we did feel that fear, motivating fear, for whatever reason, was a large part of what this liked to do with us, quite frankly. And the property owners, here again, the older residents around Marley Woods, ranchers,
right?
Some of them did look upon it, and they had an ability actually to sense when activity would start. Some of the older people, and some of them did view it as demonic, would not come out of their house. They locked themselves in their house, didn't want to partake of this. Other individuals that sensed this would come out, and actually back in the 20s and 30s, they would use this as a form of entertainment in the area. I mean, they come out and watch the light ball activity, a phenomenon with the local people call twinkle lights, where the fields would just light up with thousands of like firefly type lights. Could be in the dead of winter, which ruled out, insect infestation or anything else. So you have that with the local people there, that some did view this as demonic and some didn't. Now, it goes into strangeness that, like when the Skinwalker people were out with us, they tried to do some experiments and simulate they did at Skinwalker. And now this will sound boring as hell for paranormal people, but they would do things as such as like poltergeist type activity where things would move around, objects on a desk. They would put high-speed cameras filming a tabletop with items like a deck of cards, a pair of scissors, keys. And the unique thing about that was that when they go back and review these tapes, which dates me, it was video VHS tapes, these high-speed cameras could never actually catch the objects in movement. You would have an object go from point A to B and back again in that position without any movement. Now, the only way you can explain that is, as Jock would say, and these people, is the dimensional aspect of this. These things morph in and out dimensionally to the point A to B without any movement on our side. Otherwise, the cameras would have caught this.
So what you're describing is it would dematerialize and then rematerialize instantly several inches away.
Yes, virtually that's the explanation that was given. Yes.
And we discussed why we could never video something floating across the air when it moves. We set the cameras up, things move. Yeah, when? How? We don't know.
Absolutely.
You're really kind of screwing up my paradigm here.
Well, I will tell you, it screwed up mine for a long time.
Well, it's bringing up the even more that ghosts and UFOs are not a separate incident. They are not. They are different aspects of the same thing.
I will tell you that's absolutely what we came to believe at Marley, and I know that drives a lot of ufologists crazy because they want to think interplanetary, not dimensionally. We feel it's all one and the same thing we're dealing with here. And I'm sorry if I have to put my money on anybody, I'll put it with Ted Phillips, Alan Hynek, Jock Fillet, Ray Stanford, Stanton Freeman, and people of that caliber.
Wow.
That's the one thing they've come away from this research. They truly believe. And if you read any of Jock Fillet's books, which is they're not easy reading, I'll say, but well worth the time. That's where this has come to in this state. And
there was a guy, and I'm kicking myself. I cannot remember his name, but he was the first to really get into the Mothman incident.
Yes.
But his opinion that he wrote was Men in Black, UFOs, ghosts, cryptids was all part of the same thing. And that was back in the 60s.
Yes.
So it looks like he might have been correct on that.
Yeah. And I will tell you the wide variety of cryptids at Marley. We just had one a couple years ago where a woman veterinarian was out in the field working on one of the rancher's cattle. And actually, the rancher brought her lunch and was concerned because he goes out there and finds her medical bag on the ground spilled, her truck gone. And what had happened was she was working cattle and I think doing some inoculations or something of this sort. And she hears and feels a wind and hears a beating sound in the air, looks up and sees a winged serpentine type creature, which she describes as metallic, which makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
She jumps in her truck and tries in chase of this thing, goes across the field in her truck. When the rancher brought her lunch, he's out there, and finally she's driving back at him, and she describes what she had seen. And of course, he had never seen anything like that. And And that's the thing in Marley. So much of we have what we call one-timers in Marley. They're cryptids that are seen one shot, maybe twice, never seen before, never seen again. So, how do you deal with that? And now,
Yeah.
I will tell you, this woman veterinarian, now any of her free time she has, she goes back with it. She did take some image, which I have up on my Facebook page and our Marley Woods page. She did take a couple crude shots with her cell phone. The cell phone wasn't good in that day, but she goes back with a great camera, tries to catch this thing again, and never has. So here you have a woman veterinarian that can't explain this creature she's seen.
So you're describing, or she is describing, an iron dragon in the sky.
Yeah, a metallic serpentine type creature, and which some of the people, and when I was in ufology, believe me, working with MUFON, we never had a report of anything like that. But people like Debbie Ziegelmeyer, Margie Kay, they're coming across, they're telling me more and more reports of this type of anomaly.
Is it getting easier to report this? People aren't afraid of being labeled a kook?
Yeah. The ridicule factor has dropped down quite a bit, I feel, over the years. And, for whatever reason, this stuff is becoming more frequent. And a lot of people feel as the dimensional boundaries are weakening, or for whatever age we're in. That's why this is happening. And Ted will tell you that he felt a definite shift from the structured craft into the more light ball type lights in the sky. Now, their personal beliefs in this was that as our technologies increased, for whatever reason, this phenomena lowered the risk factor from the structured craft into the more natural elements they use for a form of ROVs. Because as you see a light in the sky, you can't track it really. It's there, it's gone. That's it. Structured craft you can track, and so Ted always felt, and these people felt, that they lowered their risk factor as our technology increased. So, but for what reason this is becoming more frequent, I really can't say.
Yeah, according to Margie Kay's recent stuff, and I think Debbie's part of it also.
Yes.
There's a lot more winged humanoids being seen and photographed, and all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah.
Is it anywhere besides Missouri? Are you getting reports from Utah or Arkansas or Virginia?
I would say it's not only nationwide right now. I would say it's almost worldwide.
Okay.
We're getting more and more reports of that type now. So for whatever reason,
we're at a crossroads of change, it seems like.
Yes.
More hauntings being reported, more ghosts, and now this.
Yes.
The things you're discussing here, Tom, is mind-bending for ghost people like me, and for UFO people.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Incredible. So let's go back to some of those cryptids you were discussing. What else has been seen out there?
And this is where it just gets so strange. One of the greatest things we documented at Marley, one of the most unique cryptids we had, was what we called the white polar bear / sloth type creature, which
I can't even put those two things together.
We have one very poor image that the rancher's daughter took the second day it was seen, and that was the only 2 days it was ever seen, before and after. And we thank God we got that image. It's poor. I have it up. I posted it, and I will post it again. It's a very bad image. You see a white, blurry creature, large size, and the rancher had seen this initially and couldn't believe what he was seeing. And this rancher can judge cattle on the hoof within poundage. And he went back, got his rifle. He shot this thing, he claimed, because he felt threatened by it, the size. And this is the strange part. This thing was seen to walk more on 2 legs than on all 4s. So he shot this thing. He said he made it red. Unfortunately, we weren't out there for 2 weeks after this. But when we got out there, he pointed us to the area of the field where this thing had crossed through a 4-strand barbed wire fence. Now, when we got out there, we did find 16-inch long white hairs on the bottom strand and top strand of a brand new 4-wire fence. Now, the interesting thing about this was the rancher was he really pointed out to us, he says, I don't mean this thing went under the fence or over the fence. This thing went through the fence. He's seen it with the scope of his rifle.
Uh-huh.
Now, that makes no sense. The fence was not damaged. So what he was describing was this physical object that he's seen and shot and made red passed physically through, like it dematerialized, went through this fence and did no damage to the fence and passed through it like it wasn't there.
Okay.
Now, we got tracks. We got plaster cast tracks of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Ted estimated the weight to be approaching over 400 or 500 pounds or more. We got hair samples. Ted sent them to a woman that worked. She's been on several TV specials, Phyllis Budinger.
Mm-hmm.
She does a great lab, does great work. And they did microscopy on the hair samples. Came back no known match. Ted had another friend sent it off in the day when this happened. We didn't have the funds to do DNA work. The other lab that did microscopy had a very crude DNA work lab they were setting up at the time. They were so intrigued by this, they ran it through. The microscopy and DNA work came back, no known match. So there you have 16-inch white long hairs from an unknown species or cryptid they can't,
Is this another game being played? Because you're telling me this thing could dematerialize, go through a fence, and yet some little pieces of it got stuck there.
Right.
How
right.
is that possible? Either you're dematerializing or you're not.
That's what we'd like to know. Was it in the stage before it dematerialized or it rematerialized on the other side? Did it lose these hairs in the process of going through the fence? We don't know. And this was the kind of thing with Ted, I will tell you, that drove him crazy because he had to have a physical explanation for this.
2 + 2 had to equal 4 for Ted.
Right.
And this is not equaling out. When you say it turned red, are you saying he saw the bullet enter the body and blood come out?
He described as what he thought this thing had bled.
Okay.
That's what he was describing, that he made it red, that he thought he injured this thing. And of course, it showed no effect of this. The next day, his daughter seen actually 2 objects like this. And neither one had any sign of injury or blood or red. So that's all we have on that cryptid. So
incredible.
Yeah.
And what about dogmen, Sasquatch type characters or creatures? They were seen there and have been shot, right?
Well, the only known Bigfoot sighting in the county was in very close proximity, Marley Woods, within a stone's throw of one of the property boundaries.
Okay.
And I will tell you that Marley consists of 2 ranches. We had Site 1, Site 2, and 3, which was made up of 2 ranches. One was over 1,000 acres. One was approaching that. And I will tell you that we dealt our small team. You're talking about an area that was 2 miles east and west and 3 miles north and south.
Okay.
And these are gated areas in the middle of nowhere, heavily gated. You're talking dirt road off of gravel roads to trails we worked. So, and this stuff would work. When it was at one end, one team was at one end, things would start happening at the other end of the ranch. And we'd get there and it would go back to the other side of the ranch. So it was challenging, I will tell you.
Well, it's an intelligence, whatever it is, yes, intelligently decides what to do. And again, as you said, it sounds like it's almost testing you all.
Yes.
It's like putting the cheese away from the mouse and watching it look for it.
Absolutely. And Ted always called Marley his living laboratory. And towards the end, he walked away with the idea that we weren't, it was observing us and working us as much as we were there to observe it. And fear at times was a factor. We do feel it used fear as a tool on some of the ranchers and people for whatever reason, to see a reaction to judge what reaction that people would have. But that was very much a part of it.
So you're saying it creates fear within the person's own mind rather than it actually, a ghost appears and is coming at you. You get scared. But
Yes.
they're not seeing this sort of thing. They're just suddenly becoming afraid.
Right. And but I will tell you, it goes into very physical effects that that instilled fear in people. I mean, Marley
Go ahead.
had a long history of cattle mutilation,
Right.
horses killed. So you named a skinwalker-ish type event, and I can go into that too. Some of the cryptids that are as strange as it gets.
This whatever's going on there has been astounding. The things you're saying is a paradigm shift for
Yes.
all of us, I believe. So let's go back. The cemetery. What all happened around there?
I will go into one of the cases. The rancher on site one has a caretaker, and the caretaker is a great guy. But I will tell you, he will not go out at night anymore. He's experienced so much. You might ask, what good is a caretaker on a cattle ranch if he won't go outside at night?
Right.
But it stems from a experience he had, and one of the ranchers had the same experience, and some other locals. And now this gets as skinwalkerish as you can imagine. With in close proximity, there's a private cemetery there, which over the years I imagine that there's probably approaching 150 people laid to rest in this little private cemetery.
Okay.
That goes back into the 1800s,
and it's being maintained.
Yeah, it's being well maintained.
Okay.
And but the caretaker came home one evening. He noticed some activity going down from the private road onto the county road, which there is a county road that accesses this cemetery also. And he gets out and thinks somebody's messing around the property. He has a small caliber 22 pistol he takes with him. And he describes just what's been seen in Skinwalker, a progression of hooded figures. At first glance, he thought they were walking down the highway. And at first, he estimated there were 6 to 7 figures this time. Walking down, hooded figures. He got behind them. He started yelling at these individuals. He thought they were individuals for whatever reason. At that point, he noticed that they weren't so much as walking as they were floating above the ground in progression. He continues yelling at this group of hooded figures. The end figure turns around, and he actually wished it never had, and looked at him. And he describes seeing a wolf-like face, a very long wolf type of face under the hood, looks at him. At this point, it turns around. They continue their progression towards the cemetery. He pulls out his small caliber handgun, which, as you know, a 22 is not, you really don't want to mess with anything with a 22. He fires several rounds at this thing, and he is a good shot. No reaction from these figures, no response. And as they got to the cemetery, they just started to fade out. And they actually, in progression, faded out of vision. And that's not the only time this had been witnessed in this area.
Okay.
So you explain that. It's
I was with you until the wolf. After the wolf, my explanations all just go away. I can't hit that one.
And I will tell you, in the early days of Skinwalker Ranch, there were, shapeshifters. That's not an uncommon element out there. So, the man, this so affected him, and him witnessing a lot of other activity in the area. But this was one of the things why, the man will not come out of his mobile home there on the property at night. And if you go up and knock on his door, you better call the man first, because there's some evenings when the light ball activity is current and different things happen. He sits on a chair facing the door with his gun. So you really don't want to go up and knock on that door. Or
How can anyone live that way? I mean, that kills me.
He loves the property. The rancher takes care of him very well, and
Okay.
he hasn't got a family, and it's his home. So he loves during the daylight hours. He loves taking care of the cattle, which actually it was a big cattle ranch. It was worked in the day. It's just a few head now for the rancher's private use consumption. But he loves working with cattle. He loves the ranch, and he deer hunts out there. And he just loves the place. But he will not go out at night and deal with this.
But from what you're telling me, there's a lot of stuff goes on in the daytime just as well.
Yes. Yeah, there is.
Has he had any experiences with iron dragons or Sasquatch?
The property owners have had a lot over the years. There's been a lot of structured craft sightings. One of the most dramatic, they were coming home one evening. It was a summer evening. It was still plenty light. And the rancher's wife first spotted this object. It was a cylindrical flat black object. And she asked her husband, the only way they could figure this out in their mind was she asked her husband, who's getting a large oil tank delivered by helicopter? Because that's the only thing she's seen this. But it turned out it was a large, several 100-foot long black cylindrical object with a row of windows that was illuminated from the internally with a pale yellow light. And this is the only time Ted in all his history had seen, in conjunction with a structured craft, ranchers spotted the light balls coming in and out of the end of this structured craft.
Wow.
And that's the only time Ted had ever come up with light balls with a structured craft in the same sighting. So, but how do you explain that? And
it was making a delivery. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just the high strangeness. It's just phenomenal out there. And we have triangular craft. We have 30, 60-foot disc sighted outside people's windows, kitchen windows, saucer nest or agroglyphs, which Ted didn't like to call. He did not like to refer to these as crop circles, which is commonly a term used, because if you didn't spot like a crop circle in conjunction, actually visually see a disc or a structured craft making this, you didn't log it down as a crop circle.
Okay. But I know there were people who have videoed light balls making the crops lay down in other countries.
Yeah, we have that in other countries. We don't have that at Marley, actually having light balls doing that. We had several actually agroglyphs, or what people term crop circles, at Marley, though, that in fact there was one put down in a 12-foot wide cattle run. This thing was put down overnight, where the property owner would run several hundred head of cattle through. And I will tell you that after this was spotted, and Ted researched this, took soil samples, did the science in it, and never come up with any anomalies actually. And but several years after this, the cattle, they actually had to move the cattle run, because the cattle, rather than run through this 12-foot wide cattle run, would bust the fence and go around this. They would not set foot, put a hoof in this where the crop circle or agroglyph had been.
And this is years later.
Yes. So what did they sense to this day that was in that? We have no idea. There was no EMF out of the ordinary, no chemically induced subject.
No radiation. There's nothing there the cattle should be afraid of.
No. But yet they sensed something. It would not go into that area, which there again, that points to the dimensional aspect of this. So the high strangeness is just, it goes on and on like that.
And nothing really seems connected. You've got, like I said, UFOs, Sasquatch, ghosts, spirits. Just nothing seems to be connected.
Yes. And, there was an activity out there that Ted experienced himself. There were vortexes that the property owner had friends, and they used to come out and deer hunt his property. One individual was a very big game hunter that went up north, hunted polar bear, not polar bear, but
Bear
Kodiak and different bears. And the man was like John Wayne. He wasn't afraid of anything. On one occurrence, he was out there and was in his deer stand one morning and experienced what he described as chatter. He heard voices right underneath his deer stand. He seen like there was action, or he could see in the grass things moving, but he could never actually see, as Ted described them, as little guys. But he heard what he described as chatter or a language he couldn't understand, and it drove the man crazy. And then he got into what they call the Vortex Motion, which took actually the tree he was in, and as if it was in a tornado, all the branches would swirl on a calm day. And Ted was questionable of this activity till one day he was in that locality on the ranch, and he was underneath a large oak tree, and he experienced this for himself. A calm day, no wind, no weather, and this tree started swirling in a vortex like it was caught in a tornado. And I mean, he hit the ground, and he didn't know what to expect from this. So you just can't explain this stuff, you know.
Everything you say, every time you launch into a story, you bring up 3 or 4 more things I got to ask about. What was Ted referring to as little people?
Over time in Ted's investigating cases, you know, the typical thing that was in conjunction with a UFO sighting was the small gray entities, you know, that's so common. He did so much documentation of these in conjunction with a UFO, a disc sighting, that and that had been seen at Marley to a degree. Other people had seen, and but whenever he dealt with entities on the ground, you know, he would call them the little guys, and like Ted said in the beginning, when his first time out at Marley, had it been a disc with little guys crawling all over it, he would have been so prepared for this. And the first time he was out there with a rancher to experience Marley, and Ted will tell you it's the first time he actually seen activity. I will tell you that Alan Hynek had taken Ted, and Alan had brought Ted to areas, and Ted did experience the real thing, and which we could go into later, but it was the first place Ted had actually seen activity, light balls, and structured craft himself. And you know, the first time Ted seen light balls, or the ambers he called them, he was with a property owner, had a video camera in his hand, and he asked the property owner, he said, well, when does this stuff start? And the property owner said, well, Ted, it's starting there in the north right now. And Ted looked up and seen some of these amber light balls coming towards him, and then they froze and went into this just fluorescence that was incredible. And Ted said the property owner looked at him and said, well, Ted, I'm not an expert on this, but shouldn't you have the movie camera pointed at the object? And Ted was so caught off guard with this, he realized he had the movie camera pointed at the ground. He raised it and got about 7 seconds of this amber, which we have those images yet. But like he said, you're just not prepared for this stuff when it happens. You never know what to expect.
Yeah, you never are prepared for the first time, but
right. And that sounds like a cop out to people that haven't done this work, you know.
Oh no, I understand. I wish I had the video from my early days of ghost hunting, because so much stuff happened and I was going, what?
Right.
You know? And I thought photographs was the great. Now I only carry video, but
right.
You have shared so much stuff with us. You're talking, I don't know how to call it. I want to call them leprechauns or fairy people, but some small genetically person, some small creature that's intelligent.
Yes.
You're talking about stuff that makes a tree twist in the air and nothing else around it.
Right.
UFOs, ghosts, some kind of what anyone else would call a demonic creature with a wolf face and a robe walking into a cemetery. What are you dealing with, man? And how is this kept a secret for the last 70 years?
It's, you're right on that. And that's why I still have to fall back on. And I know a lot of ufologists take this to offense to this more than the paranormal people, but even paranormal people, I always say you have to keep this in the back of your mind. And I'm not saying you're not dealing with a real entity or a real experience. It's very real to you when you're dealing with it. But as going back to what Jock says, this phenomena has the ability to create a distortion of the sense of reality and substitute with artificial sensations. Now, it so explains a lot of what you're dealing with. And I believe that everything we dealt with at Marley happened? I absolutely do. What were we perceiving this in the physical sense of what it really was? We don't know. And that's the big question. And
it doesn't seem like that big. What you're saying, in my opinion, to what I'm getting is what you experienced is what you experienced. You have to question the source.
Right.
And, well, of course, I mean, that just makes sense to question everything. That's science. In spite of what Dr. Fauci says, questioning the science is part of science.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. In the last 3 minutes I've got, you had a story about a horse once. Are you wanting to stay away from that? Because
it's very graphic. If your listeners can take it, I'll warn you ahead of time. It's very graphic.
Oh, my guys can take it. They're tough.
I can do a short synopsis of that. And
please.
Virtually what that entails is one of the ranchers at Site 2, his home was above his pasture. He had an old barn. He kept one of his favorite his prize horse in that he rode. And every morning he had a habit of going down there. He'd feed it sugar, check on it, and run the fence line and check his fence line. And the whole time he ran the fence line, he was within sight of this barn. And he goes out, feeds the horse sugar, goes on his tour, runs the fence line. About 30 minutes later, he comes back by towards the barn, and he notices one of the gates ajar, and the door to the barn he had just been in, and he knew he didn't leave it in that state. So he goes up to the barn and walks in, and what he describes as a slaughterhouse. I mean, this is just beyond imagination. He finds hunks of horse flesh hanging from the rafters, on the sides of the gate, on the floor, blood covering everything, and boarding in the barn. Unfortunately, we did not have a full-time presence out there then. He called Ted, and we got out there 3 weeks later. And him and a neighbor had taken all the large hunks of flesh, burned everything they could burn. And we did take soil samples in the barn and samples of the blood. Ted ran it off to Phillips Budinger again. Right. They found no anomalies. Now, Ted over the years had come up to anomalies like this overseas with animals and sometimes actually humans. But what Ted determined, make this story short, was it was as if this horse had been put in a microwave oven and it exploded. There were no explosive traces found in the sampling. We wanted to do more sampling. We got back there. It so bothered the rancher that he actually, viewing this from his house, he burned the barn down.
It was an older
barn. He didn't want to deal with it anymore. And
Tom, there is so many stories you've got. I wish we had more time because I could spend the whole day listening to this. But Marley Woods is an incredible place, and you're going back. You're not done investigating yet, right?
No.
All right. Well, keep me in mind, especially if you get any paranormal activity. I want it, okay?
You'll be the first one. I will contact you and fill you in on that.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks again for showing up. We'll talk at you later.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Folks, I only got a few seconds because I just couldn't stop Tom. His stories were amazing, as you heard. But let me give you a real quick, have a happy New Year. I hope 2022 is a far better year than we've had the last couple of years. I wish you health and freedom, and well, God bless you. Take care and stay spooked.